Your wife wasn't just running from a divorce, she was running from a secret identity she stole. And now the people who think she's dead are hunting you and the children she just sacrificed herself to save. The divorce papers felt like they were printed on sandpaper, grating against my soul with every clause. Sarah, my ex-wife, had always had a flair for the dramatic, but this was a new level of cruelty. We'd been amicable, or so I thought, for the better part of a year after the split, a clean break, or so we'd agreed, especially concerning our twin daughters, Lily and Maya. They were 10, inseparable, and the only good thing I'd managed to build in the last decade. Then came the email, stark white text against a cold gray background, arriving at 3 a.m., jolting me awake with the kind of adrenaline jolt usually reserved for car crashes. If you contest custody, David, I will ensure you never see them again. I have connections now, stronger ones than you realize. You'll be fighting ghosts. The tone was different. Gone was the saccharine politeness she'd adopted post-separation, the one where she insisted we were co-parenting pioneers. This was pure threat, laced with an unnerving confidence. I reread the email, my throat tightening. Sarah had always been ambitious, but her ambition usually involved climbing the corporate ladder at some mediocre marketing firm. Connections? Ghosts? It sounded like something out of a bad spy novel. I tried calling her, straight to voicemail. I drove by her new apartment, a sleek, modern place downtown that cost more than my entire yearly salary, a place she claimed she got through a very generous inheritance from a distant aunt. I saw her car in the driveway, a black Mercedes SUV I'd never seen before. She wasn't home. Panic was a cold, hard knot in my stomach. I was a high school history teacher. I taught the Peloponnesian War. I graded papers on Tuesdays. I didn't fight legal battles involving shadowy connections. My savings account looked pitiful next to the sheer audacity of her threat. 2 days later, the temporary custody hearing was set. I showed up at the courthouse feeling like an imposter wearing a borrowed suit, clutching a manila folder full of elementary school report cards and photos of me helping the girls build a disastrously leaning birdhouse. Sarah was there, radiating an almost alarming calm. She was wearing a tailored charcoal suit, her makeup flawless, her expression one of weary, misunderstood motherhood. Beside her sat a lawyer who looked like he ate opposing counsel for breakfast. Sharp eyes, expensive tie, and an aura that screamed $600 an hour. My lawyer, bless his overworked soul, was Mark Jansen. Mark was good, but he usually dealt with traffic violations and messy small business dissolutions. He took one look at Sarah's high-powered representation and sighed, running a hand over his thinning hair. "David," he murmured as we waited outside the courtroom, "I'm not going to sugarcoat this. They've filed a motion alleging unstable home environment and cited several vague incidents from 2 years ago, things we already resolved during mediation. But the way they're pushing this, it feels like they have something heavy in reserve." "What kind of heavy?" I whispered, my voice cracking. "She works at a print shop, Mark. She's terrified of spiders. What leverage does she have?" Mark just shook his head, his eyes distant. "I don't know. But their lead counsel just mentioned something off the record about international jurisdiction concerns. That phrase, David, is usually reserved for espionage or organized crime. I need time. I need to dig into Sarah's recent activity, financials, travel records, anything that doesn't align with the woman you married." The judge called our case. We stood up, facing the bench. Sarah looked over at me, a tiny, almost imperceptible smirk playing on her lips, a predator assessing prey. "Mr. Harrison," the judge began, his voice neutral. We are here regarding the temporary custody arrangement for Lily and Maya Harrison. Ms. Harrison's counsel has presented compelling initial documentation suggesting significant risk factors in Mr. Harrison's current custody arrangement. My heart hammered against my ribs. I risked a glance at Mark, who looked pale. Then, the opposing counsel stood, leaning into the microphone with predatory grace. Your Honor, we are prepared to introduce evidence that Mr. Harrison's ex-wife, Ms. Harrison, has recently become privy to information regarding her own background that profoundly impacts her current capacity to maintain a stable environment for the children. I frowned, utterly confused. Her background? That made no sense. Then, Mark suddenly grabbed my arm with surprising force, his knuckles white. Your Honor, Mark interrupted, his voice suddenly sharp and urgent, cutting through the lawyer's smooth delivery. I move for an immediate recess. I have just received an urgent communication that necessitates immediate clarification before this court proceeds with any ruling on custody. This evidence relates directly to Ms. Harrison's true identity, and frankly, Your Honor, if this information is true, Ms. Harrison is not just a concerned parent. She may be in danger, or worse, she may be someone entirely different. The judge paused, looking intrigued despite himself. On what grounds, Mr. Jansen? This is a custody hearing, not a deposition for the CIA. Mark didn't look at the judge. He was staring, wide-eyed, at Sarah, who had gone completely still, her composure finally cracking, a flicker of raw, undisguised terror passing across her face before she masked it. The grounds, Your Honor, Mark continued, lowering his voice but making sure the courtroom heard, are that Miss Sarah Harrison, the petitioner in this case, is not the Sarah Harrison we all believe her to be. My office has uncovered records suggesting that the woman currently using that name legally died 7 years ago in a security incident in Eastern Europe, and the person sitting here today, the mother of Mr. Harrison's children, is operating under a false identity linked to a highly classified, defunct intelligence program. The courtroom went silent. You could have heard a dust mite sneeze. The opposing counsel sputtered, running a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair, looking genuinely blindsided for the first time. The judge leaned forward, his face a mask of professional skepticism mixed with undeniable curiosity. Sarah, or whoever she was, didn't flinch visibly, but I saw it in the tension in her jaw, the way her perfectly manicured hands clenched beneath the table. For a terrifying second, I wondered if Mark had completely lost his mind, if this desperate Hail Mary pass was going to result in me losing the girls because I hired an overzealous history teacher turned lawyer. Mr. Jansen, the judge said slowly, tapping his gavel once, the sound echoing loudly in the silence. You are making a serious allegation that borders on slander in a court of law. I will grant a brief recess, 30 minutes, if you cannot substantiate this claim with verifiable documentation, and I mean hard proof, not rumor. I will hold you in contempt and immediately grant Miss Harrison temporary full custody based on the evidence already presented regarding instability. Mark nodded curtly, already pulling out his phone, his focus locked on something only he could see. I will have it, Your Honor. Give me 20 minutes. He grabbed my arm again and practically dragged me out of the courtroom into a small, sterile hallway, usually reserved for bailiffs. Mark, what the hell was that? I hissed, my heart still trying to beat its way out of my chest. Defunct intelligence program? Eastern Europe? We met at a community college mixer. Mark pulled me into an alcove, his eyes darting around as if expecting surveillance drones. I didn't just pull that out of thin air, David. Remember when I said I looked into her recent financials? I traced the large sums of money flowing into that downtown apartment lease. They weren't coming from an inheritance. They were routed through 3 shell corporations based in Cyprus, eventually tracing back to a holding company registered in Zurich. That company has deep ties to former Black Ops logistics firms, the kind that specialized in asset relocation and deep cover integration. Integration. She was integrating into my life as a suburban mom. I felt a hysterical bubble rising in my throat. She cried during the notebook. She argued with me for an hour about the correct temperature for sourdough starter. People who are trained to fool governments are very, very good at fooling history teachers, David, Mark said grimly. He tapped frantically on his tablet. The name Sarah Harrison, it's clean, too clean. I ran facial recognition on some old, obscure photos I managed to pull from an unsecured university database. Photos from Sarah's supposed undergraduate days. He turned the tablet toward me. It showed a grainy photo of a young woman with dark hair and piercing eyes, looking intensely serious, standing next to a military-style transport vehicle. It was her, undeniably, but harder, colder. And the date stamp on the photo was from 4 years before she claimed to have graduated college. "The woman you married," Mark breathed, his voice tight with realization, "was very likely recruited or activated years before she told you. She was deep cover, David. And my contact in the cyber division just sent me a ping. Remember that email she sent you? The one threatening to take the girls? It didn't come from her usual IP address or provider. It came from a heavily encrypted server hosted by an entity known only by the designation Orion, a group linked to industrial espionage and, well, let's just say things that aren't taught in high school history. Why now? I managed to choke out. Why risk blowing 7 years of cover just to get full custody? We were co-parenting fine. Mark's face hardened. That's the terrifying part. If she's been maintaining this deep cover for 7 years, 7 years of marriage, 2 children, then something has gone critically wrong in her primary mission. She's not fighting for the girls, David. She's fighting for control over them. Or maybe she's trying to escape with them. Just then, Mark's phone buzzed violently. It was a secure line only used by his specialized digital contact. He looked down at the screen and his jaw dropped. "What is it, Mark? Spill it." He lifted his head, his expression a mixture of professional triumph and sheer terror. "My contact says that the identity Sarah Harrison was using, the one she supposedly took over, was flagged by a major international agency 3 weeks ago as having been compromised. They weren't looking for her. They were looking for the person she was impersonating." "So what does that mean for us?" I urged, leaning in, desperate for a foothold in this nightmare. "It means someone realized the original Sarah Harrison is either dead or missing, and they are tracing the immediate associates of that identity," Mark whispered, glancing nervously back toward the courtroom doors. "The people they use to trace compromised assets don't send cease and desist letters, David. They send retrieval teams, and those teams operate with zero regard for civilian life or jurisdiction." He took a deep, shuddering breath. "The reason she needs custody now isn't about you getting the birdhouse photos thrown in her face. It's about making sure the girls are officially designated as being under her control, under her legal jurisdiction, so that when the people looking for the real Sarah Harrison show up, they find a legitimate legal guardian, not a divorced father caught in the crossfire. And my contact just warned me. The agency tracing the identity has flagged a high probability of immediate physical intervention in this city within the next 12 hours. They are mobilizing now. If we don't act in the next 10 minutes, we might not be able to find the girls at all because Sarah might not be sticking around for the judge's ruling. The air in the hallway suddenly felt thin, toxic. 12 hours. Intervention. My mind raced, trying to reconcile the sweet, slightly neurotic woman who argued about paint swatches with a highly trained operative running from international agents. "We need to get the girls," I stated flatly, the teacher persona dissolving into something primal. "Where are they right now?" She told the babysitter they were having a special mommy-daughter spa day downtown at her apartment complex, Mark said, checking his watch again, his eyes already calculating exit routes. It was the perfect cover for a quick extraction. But if your assessment of her threat is correct, she's not planning on going to a spa. She's planning on running, and she's using the custody hearing as the final legal smokescreen before she vanishes. We burst back into the courtroom just as the judge was about to call us back in. Mark approached the bench, his demeanor radiating frantic urgency, forcing the opposing counsel to step back. "Your Honor, I apologize for the interruption, but my client's safety, and more importantly, the safety of his minor children, is now in immediate, verifiable jeopardy. I move to dismiss this custody hearing and petition for an emergency protective order based on credible evidence of international operative threat and potential immediate flight risk." The judge blinked, taken aback by Mark's raw intensity. "Mr. Jansen, calm down. You have 10 seconds to present something concrete, or I—" Before the judge could finish the sentence, the double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with shocking violence, slamming against the wall. 2 men in dark, impeccably tailored suits, the kind that cost more than my annual salary, strode purposefully down the main aisle. They didn't look at the judge or the lawyers. Their eyes scanned the room with chilling efficiency, moving with a practiced, sweeping pattern. They were clearly looking for Sarah. The opposing counsel immediately stood up, looking furious. "What is the meaning of this intrusion? Bailiff!" One of the suited men ignored him completely, stopping halfway down the aisle. He pulled out a sleek silver device that looked alarmingly like a government-issue tracer. It started emitting a faint, almost inaudible, high-pitched whine. He pointed it toward the side door leading to the family services waiting area, the same area Sarah had used to enter the courthouse earlier. "That's not their process," Mark muttered to me, suddenly looking terrified. "They aren't police. They aren't federal marshals. They're cleanup." The man with the tracer nodded to his partner, who immediately moved to flank him, blocking the main exit. The whine from the device increased in pitch, confirming Sarah, or the person she was impersonating, was close. The judge, finally realizing this wasn't routine, slammed his gavel repeatedly. "Order, order in my courtroom. Who are you gentlemen?" The man with the tracer ignored the judge entirely. He spoke into a nearly invisible microphone near his lapel, his voice low but carrying the hard edge of absolute command. "Asset located on premises. Preparing for extraction. Advise immediate containment of known associates." Containment. Associate. That meant me. Mark shoved me hard toward the side door leading to the clerk's offices, away from the intruders. "Go. Get out the back way. I'll try to buy you 60 seconds. I need to call in the cavalry, the real cavalry, the ones who handle this kind of mess if they exist." I didn't argue. The sight of those 2 men moving with such lethal purpose in a place of law paralyzed my ability to think rationally, but the instinct to protect my children overrode everything else. I sprinted toward the side door, Mark creating a noisy diversion by shouting about procedural violations and civil rights. I burst through the side door and into a maze of beige hallways. I could hear shouting from the courtroom behind me, followed by a heavy, muffled sound, a struggle, maybe a door being slammed open somewhere further down the hall. I reached the stairwell, took the steps 2 at a time, and burst out into the courthouse parking garage, blinded by the sudden afternoon sun. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the driver's side door open. I had to get to her apartment, her safe house. I floored the gas pedal, tires squealing on the concrete ramp. Downtown was 20 minutes away under normal traffic. I didn't have 20 minutes. As I merged onto the busy city street, my phone rang. It wasn't Mark, it was a blocked number. Hesitantly, I answered. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was Sarah's, but it wasn't the manicured, slightly stressed voice of my ex-wife. It was the voice from the grainy photograph, cold, measured, and utterly devoid of warmth. "David, you shouldn't have listened to your lawyer. He's compromised your position. I was going to protect them. Now I have to move faster." "Sarah, where are the girls? I'm coming to your apartment now," I yelled, weaving violently to avoid a city bus. There was a brief, chilling pause, punctuated by the faint sound of children's voices, high, muffled crying in the background. "You won't find me at the apartment, David. That location is burned. They're already on the move. But I owe you one thing for the inconvenience. I'm sending you a location ping from my secure transport vehicle. It's the only way you'll see them before I cross the border." The call disconnected. My phone immediately pinged with a text message. It contained a single complex string of GPS coordinates, displaying a location deep in the industrial port district, far from the usual commuter routes. Then my phone buzzed again, the screen flickering to life with a new, terrifying notification. A news alert flashing across the top of my screen, originating from the courthouse district. Breaking. Police investigating disturbance at municipal courthouse. 2 unidentified men in suits apprehended after engaging in unauthorized physical altercation with courthouse staff. Reports suggest connection to ongoing international investigation. I looked down at the GPS coordinates pointing toward the docks, then back at the news alert confirming that the men looking for Sarah were now in police custody. Had Mark bought us time? Or had Sarah orchestrated this entire chaotic scene to ensure that the retrieval teams were busy while she made her final escape? As I sped toward the port, preparing for a confrontation that felt less like a custody battle and more like a Cold War exchange gone wrong, a final message popped up on the GPS app. It was from Sarah. "One more thing, David. The reason I needed full custody so badly, it wasn't to keep them with me. It was to ensure that when the people who think I'm dead finally find me, the children are legally registered as my dependents and not his." His? The word hung in the digital air, an accusation, a warning, a revelation that shattered the neatly constructed reality of my life. The people who thought she was dead, the dependents. Who was he? And why did my daughter's legal standing suddenly matter more than their physical safety to an operative running from international agencies? I screeched the car into the port district, the metallic stench of brine, diesel, and decaying cargo, replacing the sterile smell of the courthouse. The GPS led me not to a legitimate shipping office, but to a vast, derelict warehouse complex nestled between a container yard and the murky water of the bay. The coordinates pinpointed a single unmarked loading bay door, slightly ajar. I grabbed the tire iron from the trunk, a pathetic defense against whatever ghosts Sarah was running from, but it was all I had. I crept toward the loading bay, the muffled sounds of the harbor waves competing with a low, persistent humming sound emanating from inside the warehouse. Peeking around the heavy metal door, I saw it. Not a luxury SUV, but a heavily modified matte black transport van, its windows completely opaque. A hydraulic lift was lowering the rear ramp. Standing near the van were two figures. One was Sarah, wearing dark, practical clothing that made her look 10 years older and infinitely more dangerous than the mother I'd argued with over mortgage rates. She was gripping Lily's hand tightly. Maya was crying silently beside them. Standing opposite Sarah was another man. He wasn't wearing a suit like the goons at the courthouse. He was tall, lean, and moved with the same unnerving economy of motion as Sarah, but his presence felt heavier, more professional. He held a clipboard and was speaking quietly, gesturing toward the open ramp of the van. He looked like the man in charge of an extraction team. "They need to be registered correctly before we move across the maritime border, Agent Harrison," the man said, his voice smooth, carrying clearly in the cavernous space. "Jurisdiction is the problem. The other party is aware of the identity compromise. They are already tracking the original target's known associates, namely Mr. Harrison, the history teacher." Sarah nodded, her face grim. "I know. That's why I needed the dissolution finalized today. Once the judge signs the order, I control the legal framework. David's usefulness as a distraction is expiring." Distraction. I wasn't just the scared father. I was a pawn in their elaborate game of identity theft and evasion. "But we are running out of time," the man continued, checking his own sophisticated tracking device. "The agency is scrambling assets. They're likely already sweeping his last known coordinates, the courthouse." "Then they'll find nothing but a mess," Sarah retorted, pushing the girls gently toward the van. "Lily, Maya, get in, quickly." Lily, bless her stubborn heart, dug her heels in. "Mom, where are we going? I want to go home." "We are going somewhere safe, sweetheart," Sarah said, but the edge of desperation was back in her voice. "Just trust me." The man in charge sighed impatiently. "Agent, the window is closing. We can't wait for full compliance. We have clearance for expedited transport if necessary." As Sarah finally managed to hustle the terrified twins into the back of the black van, the humming sound I'd heard earlier intensified. It wasn't coming from the van. It was coming from the far end of the warehouse, near the docks. I heard a distinct heavy clank as a chain was released. A massive steel container, one of those stacked hundreds high in the yard, suddenly shifted, tilting precariously. The man with the clipboard spun around, eyes wide with alarm. "Damn it, they're not sending cleanup teams. They're moving assets. They're locking down the zone." Before anyone could react, a section of the container wall burst outward, not peeled or cut, but seemingly blasted from the inside. A figure emerged from the smoking ruin of the container, silhouetted against the glaring light reflecting off the water. This person was larger, bulkier than the men at the courthouse, and moved with an utterly brutal efficiency. They carried no clipboard or sleek tracker. They carried something that looked frighteningly like military-grade hardware. Sarah instantly shoved the last door of the van shut and turned to face the new threat, pulling a small, flat object from her belt. A weapon, small but clearly lethal. "Go! Get them across the water now!" she screamed at the driver, who didn't hesitate, slamming the vehicle into gear. The van roared to life and began backing out of the loading bay, the headlights briefly illuminating the scene. Sarah didn't try to follow the van or run away from the approaching figure. She planted her feet, raised the small weapon, and stepped directly into the path of the approaching threat. "You want me?" she yelled, her voice echoing, suddenly sounding more like the woman I married, filled with a desperate, protective fury. "You're going to have to go through the identity I stole first." The figure from the container raised his weapon. I didn't wait to see the result of that standoff. The van carrying my daughters was already halfway across the industrial yard. I sprinted after it, fueled by sheer terror and the new, terrifying knowledge that my ex-wife was not only not who she claimed to be, but she had just deliberately sacrificed herself to buy my children, our children, a head start, leaving me to navigate the fallout of her secret past. As I reached the ramp, scrambling into the back of the speeding van, I realized the driver wasn't looking at the road. He was staring blankly ahead, his hands frozen on the wheel, a single neat bullet hole blooming crimson in the center of his forehead. The van swerved violently, gathering terrifying speed as it headed directly for the edge of the pier, the water rushing up to meet us, and I had no idea how to stop it. The van bucked like a wild horse as the driver slumped over, the trajectory irrevocably set toward the dark, churning water of the bay. Lily and Maya, trapped in the back, were screaming, their small bodies thrown against the metal walls of the cargo area. I was thrown against the driver's seat, the smell of burnt gunpowder mixing sickeningly with the diesel fumes. The coordinates. Sarah's last words. The people who think I'm dead are tracking his known associates. His usefulness as a distraction is expiring. The driver wasn't the extraction specialist. He was another pawn, likely a low-level asset Sarah had secured to drive the vehicle. He was compromised, silenced by the same silent protocol that had just struck down my lawyer and now threatened us. My hands scrambled over the dashboard, searching for the brake, any mechanism that could wrest control from this metal projectile. The steering wheel was locked, responding to nothing. I saw the glint of the water filling the windshield, a black, oily expanse rushing to meet us. There had to be an emergency release. Black Ops transport vans built for rapid infiltration and exfiltration wouldn't rely solely on the driver. I frantically scanned the center console. Behind a small, unmarked panel, secured with a single magnetic latch, I found it. A heavy-duty red lever, unlabeled, emergency override. I yanked it down with all my strength. With a jarring, screeching sound, the van's engine immediately cut out. The power steering died, but the momentum carried us forward. The nose of the van hit the edge of the concrete pier with a bone-jarring impact that slammed my head against the ceiling. Metal groaned under the stress. For a horrifying second, we hung there, the front tires dangling over the void, the heavy rear wheels still gripping the asphalt. Lily and Maya wailed, convinced this was the end. "Hold on," I roared, kicking open the cargo partition separating me from the girls. Just as the van began its inevitable slow tilt toward the water, the heavy rear doors burst open. Not from the impact, but because the internal locking mechanism had been overridden. It must have been a fail-safe Sarah had programmed, recognizing the catastrophic failure of the driver. The force of the tilt, combined with the hydraulic release, threw the doors wide. Through the opening, I saw the dark water rushing closer, but I also saw movement on the dock behind us. The heavy-set operative who had emerged from the exploded shipping container was there, standing just meters away, raising his weapon again. He wasn't aiming at me. He was aiming at the van itself, preparing to sink us. But before he could fire, a faint, high-pitched whirring sound cut through the air. A drone, small, fast, and armed, darted past my head, buzzing aggressively around the operative's head. It wasn't a military drone. It looked like a heavily modified commercial quadcopter, the kind an extremely skilled hobbyist might fly. And then I heard Mark Jansen's voice, breathless but triumphant, over my cell phone, which had thankfully survived the initial jolt. David, I overloaded the courthouse security grid just before I ran. I found a satellite feed tracking Sarah's secondary comms, the one she used for emergencies. I managed to piggyback onto the drone network she was using for contingency scouting. You're too close to the water. You're going to sink. Jump. Mark hadn't been detained for contempt. He'd been busy engaging her digital infrastructure. The van was tipping faster now. I grabbed Lily and Maya, tucking them close, and flung us both out the rear doors, aiming for the concrete dock just as the heavy transport vehicle plunged backward into the bay with a colossal splash, instantly disappearing beneath the murky surface. We landed hard on the concrete, coughing and soaked, but alive. The operative cursed loudly, distracted by the sudden submersion of the vehicle, his weapon momentarily lowered. The drone zipped past him again, distracting him just long enough. I didn't look back at the water where Sarah might be sinking or fighting. I dragged the girls toward the relative safety of the nearby shipping containers, the only cover available. "Where is Mark?" I gasped, clutching the whimpering twins. "He's fine." He managed to bluff his way out of the courthouse chaos by pretending to be a concerned witness, calling 911. "He's meeting us at the safe drop point, the old warehouse across town, the one you used to store your old band equipment." Mark's voice crackled with static and urgency. "But David, you need to understand what just happened. Sarah didn't kill that driver to stop the investigation. She did it to sever the digital link to the tracking mechanism embedded in that vehicle. She sacrificed the escape route to ensure they couldn't follow the vehicle's sinking signature." "And what about her?" I shouted into the phone. There was a long, dreadful silence on the line, broken only by the distant sound of sirens approaching the port. "I don't know, David. She bought you time, a substantial amount of time, by engaging the primary retrieval unit head-on. But the entity she was running from, the one they call Orion, they are highly compartmentalized. They don't leave loose ends, and they certainly don't let their top assets get captured alive if they've compromised their mission." I looked back toward the water, where the massive operative was now wading into the shallows, scanning the concrete for survivors. He wasn't looking for the girls, he was looking for Sarah. "What about the other man?" I asked, referring to the one she called Agent Harrison's handler. "The one with the clipboard?" Mark's voice dropped to a near-inaudible whisper. "David, I managed to pull one last fragment of data from the drone feed before it lost connection. The handler, the man you saw, he wasn't her partner. He was her designated successor. He was there to assume control of the assets, your daughters, once she was confirmed neutralized or captured." The operative wading out of the water spotted us. 3 small figures hiding behind a rusted container. He stopped, realizing he had the wrong targets. He raised his weapon again, not toward us, but toward the open bay door of the warehouse, presumably waiting for backup. "David, listen closely," Mark insisted, his voice strained. The secret past wasn't just about identity theft. Sarah wasn't protecting the girls from me. She was protecting them from him, the man they sent to replace her. And you, David, the history teacher, you're the only known variable left. If you can get the girls to safety, you might have a chance. But you need to know one final thing about your ex-wife's identity. I held the phone tight, shielding the twins with my body as the sounds of approaching police choppers began to drown out everything else. "What is it, Mark? Tell me." The file I pulled, the real one, the woman Sarah Harrison was impersonating, She was the daughter of a major international dissident who vanished 20 years ago. Sarah didn't steal that identity for a new life. She stole it to hide inside the structure of the organization tracking her father. She was never running from the agency, David. She was running within it. And the man now hunting you, the successor, he's not just there to take the girls. He's there to clean up the collateral damage from the mission. Your wife was running all along. Suddenly, the drone Mark controlled dropped silently onto the dock near my feet. It wasn't just a drone. A small compartment flipped open, revealing a single folded piece of paper. As the operative began to sprint toward us, weapon raised, I snatched the note, shoving the phone into my pocket. I unfolded the paper. It was written in Sarah's familiar, elegant cursive, the only personal touch I'd seen in weeks. David, the girls know the code. Tell them Mommy said, the library is safe. The operative was closing in. I looked at Lily and Maya, tears streaming down their faces, clutching each other. Girls, I shouted over the rising sound of the sirens. The library. Do you know what that means? Maya looked up at me, her eyes wide with an ancient, unnerving recognition that had nothing to do with third grade. She reached into her small backpack, pulled out a worn, leather-bound copy of The Odyssey, a book I'd given them years ago, and whispered, her voice trembling but clear. It's the safe word, Daddy. It means they're not really ours. They were waiting for him.